Under German law, criminal responsibility typically begins at the age of 14. The prevailing belief is that children younger than this simply aren't capable of committing crimes, lacking the mental maturity to inflict serious harm or harbor malicious intent. Psychologically, it's assumed that individuals so young couldn't genuinely wish death upon someone. However, the story I'm about to tell completely shatters that view. Let me take you through the events that unfolded quite recently in 2023. This horrifying episode profoundly unsettled German law enforcement, forcing them to confront the glaring imperfections within their own criminal justice system. Indeed, this case has arguably become one of the most resonant criminal summaries in Europe for 2023. What truly struck everyone wasn't merely the sheer brutality of the act, but the astonishingly young age of the participants. Moreover, the motive was so trivial that even leading psychiatrists hesitated to speculate on the future trajectory of these children. For legal reasons, some of the individuals involved in this narrative will remain unnamed and unpictured in this video, as the country's criminal law protects their identities. Our victim was Louise, a resident of Freudenberg, Germany, who had just turned 12 in 2023. Louise was a diligent student at her local school, consistently achieving good grades. She was perhaps too quiet and shy, a meekness that, unfortunately, was soon perceived as a vulnerability by her peers. Her natural inclination to avoid conflict meant that, at some point, several other children began to target her, initially with teasing. While Louise tried to simply ignore these initial jibes, it wasn't long before they escalated into full-blown bullying. Despite her tender age, Louise experienced the full force of others' cruelty. Without any discernible reason, a small group of girls started tormenting her, showing no signs of stopping. Yet, our protagonist, Louise, was determined to handle the situation on her own. She kept the torment secret from her parents and teachers. Nevertheless, two girls, aged 12 and 13, would routinely wait for her after school, accompanying her on her walk home, all the while subjecting her to relentless taunts. They meticulously chose their moments, ensuring no adults were present. Malicious jokes continued throughout the school day. They found opportunities during breaks, openly ridiculing Louise in front of her classmates. All of this unfolded precisely when teachers were least aware of what was happening. Ironically, Louise and these girls had, for a significant period, been friends. After their bond deteriorated, Louise clung to the hope that things would revert to normal, that they would rekindle their friendship. But, tragically, the situation only spiraled downwards. Over the next few months, the bullying became a daily occurrence. It felt as though these two teenagers were purposefully coming to school solely to torment their former friend. Louise, despite the escalating abuse, was too afraid to retaliate physically. She tried to reason with her tormentors verbally, but her efforts were futile. As is often the case in such scenarios, their impunity only emboldened their behavior. The bullies grew increasingly brazen, even resorting to physical violence on a few occasions. Still, fearing punishment, they made sure to leave no discernible traces. Consequently, Louise became consumed by fear to the point where he dreaded going to school at all. During this challenging period, Louise's parents observed her profound depression and attempted to uncover the root cause. However, their daughter remained stubbornly silent. Louise was terrified that revealing the truth to adults would only exacerbate her torment, so she continued to hope she could resolve it on her own. She wasn't prepared to engage in a physical confrontation, realizing her two classmates were stronger and would easily overpower her. Her verbal attempts to diffuse the situation failed, and their behavior simply became unbearable. At one particularly desperate moment, Louise threatened to tell her elders. That very day, her so-called friends again awaited her after school, but this time, their threat was more severe serious problems awaited her if adults discovered their actions. Louise was trapped, unsure of what to do. Persuasion had failed, and now, even the threat of adult intervention proved ineffective. She couldn't physically fight two girls her own age, yet she could no longer endure the relentless bullying. The following day, she returned to school, and the cycle of torment began anew. Even before the first class, her friends were already teasing her, and it persisted throughout the entire day. Finally, Louise resolved to take definitive action. She saw only one path to escape the bullying: confide in her teacher. During another break, she didn't wait for her classmates to start. Instead, she directly approached the teacher and bravely recounted the bullying. The teacher was understandably astonished. He then called the two friends aside for what he intended as an educational conversation. Louise hadn't gone into extensive detail, so the teacher merely spoke with the girls, believing this gentle approach would sensitize them. Louise was present and confirmed that her friends were indeed bothering her during every recess. It appeared the two classmates were genuinely afraid of punishment. After their talk with the teacher, they simply left Louise alone for the remainder of the day. Louise was overjoyed. She believed her torment had finally ended. In a cruel twist of fate, however, she had unknowingly signed her own death warrant. On Friday, March 10th, 2023, the very same girls who had been bullying Louise for months approached her with what appeared to be a peace offering. One of them invited Louise to her house the following day, Saturday, to spend the evening together as a gesture of reconciliation. The plan was for all three girls to gather, drink tea, and watch something together. They even offered Louise an apology, claiming they had simply overdone it with their jokes. For Louise, this was an immense relief, a moment of profound joy. Just a day prior, she had literally been at her wits' end, desperately searching for a way to escape her school nightmare. Now, it seemed her friendships were, just as she had always dreamed, on the mend. She readily accepted their invitation, even apologizing for having to complain to the teacher. Louise confessed she simply couldn't endure the bullying any longer and felt forced to resort to such extreme measures. The girls responded that they understood. All apparent tension in their friendship seemed to have vanished. On Saturday, March 11th, they proceeded with their plans to spend the evening together. That day, Louise's mother and father couldn't help but notice a dramatic change in their daughter. For months, she had been withdrawn and depressed, often secluded in her room, barely communicating. She had dreaded going to school, but now, it was as if everything had been turned on its head. Their schoolgirl was finally smiling. Her mood noticeably brightened. Naturally, her mother was equally delighted and readily allowed her to visit her friends. She was aware of their prior disagreements and was genuinely pleased that the girls' friendship seemed to have been restored. Knowing how shy her daughter was and how challenging it was for her to form bonds, this reconciliation brought as much joy to her mother as it did to Louise. The friends lived a relatively short distance from each other, either directly through a small patch of woods or via a longer route along city roads. Louise, always prioritizing safety, consistently chose the latter, safer path. After lunch, Louise set off for a friend's house. Upon arrival, she called her mother to confirm she had safely made it. The plan was for her to stay a few hours and then return home. Her parents had set an 1800 hours, 6 p.m. curfew, asking her not to be late. Louise was a responsible girl and always adhered to her family's rules. This time, however, she failed to return home on schedule. Her mother grew anxious and tried calling her daughter, but there was no answer. More than 15 minutes passed, and still, Louise hadn't appeared. Numerous calls went unanswered, and even messages sent via messenger remained unread. The mother's concern deepened. She then called the home of the friend where the gathering had occurred. The girl on the other end reported that Louise had left a long time ago, as had the other friend. This had been over half an hour prior, meaning Louise should have already arrived home. After a few more unanswered calls to their daughter, Louise's mother and father set out to find her. They got into the family car, repeatedly driving down the road where their daughter typically walked. They checked several stores along the route, but the schoolgirl was nowhere to be found. Everyone they questioned hadn't seen anyone resembling Louise. All this time, her cell phone remained silent. Eventually, the distraught parents decided to contact the police. They filed a report on the teenager's disappearance, providing all the necessary details to initiate a search. Police officers immediately took the report seriously, given that it concerned a 12-year-old child. The town itself was relatively small, with a population of around 17,000 and a close-knit community where many residents knew each other. This incident sent ripples of alarm through the citizenry. Most families had children, and the thought that they might now be in danger was chilling. Law enforcement quickly contacted the media to enlist volunteers for the search and rescue operation. Even without this official appeal, a substantial number of people stepped forward, eager to assist Louise's family. Additionally, it was crucial to issue an alert in case there were witnesses with valuable information. The search for the girl commenced that very evening, but the encroaching darkness of night significantly limited visibility and hampered their efforts. The search operation expanded to include K-9 units and even aviation. From early morning, volunteers and professional searchers worked tirelessly, intensifying their efforts. Meanwhile, the police engaged with the two friends Louise had met the evening before her disappearance. To the investigators, the schoolgirls appeared visibly anxious and frightened. This wasn't entirely surprising, considering they were discussing a missing 12 to 13-year-old. They were likely worried for their friend and themselves. Their parents, too, were deeply concerned, realizing this could have happened to any of their children and fearing a child abductor was loose in the neighborhood. The volunteers' initial focus was on the immediate area between the friends' houses. Police also began scrutinizing Louise's immediate social circle, hoping to uncover if she had any acquaintances who might pose a danger. The only piece of potentially suspicious information investigators could unearth was the testimony from teachers at the school all three girls attended. According to one teacher, just 2 days before the incident, Louise had indeed complained to him about these very same friends. However, at the time, it seemed trivial and no further suspicious details emerged from that conversation. On Sunday afternoon, a group of volunteers, expanding their search, moved through the wooded area between the girls' homes. There was a shorter path through it, one Louise could theoretically use to get home, though she had never taken that particular route before. Still, it was a theory worth investigating, and for good reason. Approximately 3 kilometers from Louise's house, near an old train station, the girl's lifeless body was discovered. The victim's head showed signs of having been struck by a blunt object, and a plastic bag covered her head. All of Louise's clothes were completely saturated with blood. Forensic examination quickly confirmed the identity of the body. It was indeed the missing Louise. It was immediately clear that the schoolgirl had not died by her own hand. The medical examiner's report revealed a horrifying truth. Louise's body bore more than 30 stab wounds. These were predominantly shallow injuries, found across nearly every part of her body. Several major blood vessels had been severed. According to the medical examiner, the cause of the schoolgirl's death was massive blood loss. After sustaining these horrific injuries, she quickly lost consciousness and died within minutes, never making it home. No drag marks were found around the body, nor were there any signs of sexual assault. It appeared to be a senseless, brutal massacre, as if the schoolgirl had simply been ambushed with a knife, repeatedly stabbed dozens of times, and then abandoned in the woods. Police did find signs of a struggle, but no definitive physical evidence was left behind. Crucially, the murder weapon was missing, which significantly complicated the hunt for the perpetrator. Authorities initially theorized they were dealing with a psychopath, someone consumed by intense rage toward the girl. The nature and sheer number of wounds suggested the killer was in a psychotic state, simply striking indiscriminately until Louise ceased showing any signs of life. There is also speculation that this fury might not have been random, but rather driven by deeply personal motives. Detectives then began a more thorough examination of the young victim's immediate environment. Louise was naturally modest and quiet, never associated with troubled individuals or dangerous company. She had no known addictions or mental health issues. She wasn't suffering from any illnesses, nor had she ever run away from home or shown any suicidal ideations. Indeed, there appear to be no potentially dangerous individuals within her immediate circle. She hailed from a well-to-do, respectable family, and her parents had no history of legal troubles or problematic associations. Investigators decided to speak again with the friends, then aged 12 and 13. They hoped the girls might have noticed something suspicious or perhaps seen someone observing Louise. However, the children insisted they had seen nothing and no one. This interaction, though, was far from fruitless. After this second police interview, the girls' anxiety visibly intensified with each passing moment. Eventually, one of them, unable to bear the relentless questioning any longer, quite literally screamed out, "We were the ones who stabbed Louise." She then buried her face in her hands and sobbed uncontrollably. The confession was so utterly shocking that even the seasoned detectives initially dismissed her words as a macabre joke. But the girl, through her tears, insisted it was true, sobbing apologies to her parents. In any normal situation, police officers would have immediately detained an individual who confessed to such a brutal act, claiming over 30 stabs. However, this time, the suspects were children, aged 12 and 13, who had wielded weapons. Under German law, individuals this young cannot be criminally prosecuted. The parents of all involved schoolgirls, along with the entire local community, were utterly aghast at this shocking revelation. After extensive discussions with the teenagers, their parents, and legal representatives, the initial confession was corroborated. The other friend also admitted her involvement. Both juvenile offenders provided a chillingly detailed account of what had transpired. According to the girls, they had indeed been relentlessly tormenting their former friend for several months over some petty, pre-existing disagreements. The schoolgirls became enraged when Louise confided in the teacher. They had believed their behavior would go unpunished. But when Louise complained, they feared their parents would be summoned to school. So, on that very same day, they made a decision to take revenge on Louise and silence her permanently, ensuring she could never complain to anyone else again. The older of the two girls decided to invite Louise over under the guise of reconciliation. This would allow them to earn her trust and lure her away from the safety of adult supervision. Their stated goal was to clear up the relationship once and for all. As part of their sinister preparation, the older friend brought along a kitchen knife. When Louise, unsuspecting, took the bait and arrived for the visit, the girls first lulled their trusting peer into a false sense of security. They drank tea and watched a few videos online, and everything appeared to be going smoothly. When Louise began preparing to go home, the older classmate offered to walk with her, suggesting they take a shortcut through the forest, claiming it was a quicker route to Louise's house. She assured Louise that with all three of them together, there was nothing to fear, and they could continue to socialize. Louise, completely unaware of the looming danger, agreed. This was the last time Louise was seen alive by the parents of the schoolgirl she had come to visit. According to the adults, this was around 5:30 p.m. The girls all left the house together, then moved some distance away to avoid any accidental witnesses. Once out of sight, the friends abruptly confronted Louise, accusing her of betrayal. The conversation quickly devolved into a heated argument among all three. The offended teenagers rapidly lost their temper. It was then that the younger girl seized Louise, forcing a plastic bag over her head, and struck her with a stone. That initial blow, however, did not kill the schoolgirl. Louise began to fight back, struggling against her attackers. But the older girl didn't stand idly by. She lunged at Louise and began to stab her repeatedly. After the horrific attack, the teenagers abandoned their peer. According to their chilling account, Louise was still alive, but likely not for long. The girl had lost consciousness and was rapidly bleeding out. With no one to help her, she soon passed away. Investigators initially found it difficult to believe that the attack could have been committed solely by these children. The girls came from ordinary families and had no prior history with law enforcement, making such a brutal murder seem utterly impossible for them. It was initially presumed there had to be a third, older teenager present, someone who would have wielded the knife. However, the juvenile offenders consistently maintained that no one else was with them. They insisted they alone had killed their former friend. The critical piece of evidence, the knife, needed to be found for fingerprint and DNA analysis. The girls admitted they had discarded the weapon somewhere in the nearby woods, but couldn't recall the exact location. They described it as a large meat knife. Search teams combed the entire area, but police were unable to locate this crucial piece of evidence. It would have been the primary key to identifying exactly who held it at the time of the murder. Despite the confessions, the police still harbored suspicions that the girls were lying and held out hope of identifying a third person who might have left DNA samples or fingerprints on the handle. Nevertheless, the teenagers continued to insist they were the sole perpetrators of the massacre. The burden then fell to the criminalists and forensic experts. The forensic examination unequivocally confirmed Louise had suffered 30 stab wounds to her stomach, back, chest, and neck. Furthermore, the victim's hands were severely cut, a grim indicator of active defensive struggles. The schoolgirl resisted as long as she could, only collapsing from blood loss, at which point her classmates delivered several more stabbing blows. During the examination, DNA samples found on Louise's body and on the plastic bag belonged to only 3 individuals present at the scene: the victim herself and the 2 confessing schoolgirls. Ultimately, the police accepted the girls' testimonies as true. No evidence of anyone else's presence could be found. Under German law, criminal responsibility is only assigned from the age of 14. For this fundamental reason, none of the participants in this horrific massacre could be arrested or formally punished. The collected evidence was instead forwarded to the Youth Welfare Office, which was then tasked with dealing with these juvenile killers. The school attended by the teenagers reopened on Monday, with child psychologists immediately on site to ensure frightened students receive the necessary help and support. The psychologists remained at the educational institution for 3 days, during which formal classes took a back seat. Specialists held one-on-one sessions with some of the most shocked pupils, and joint meetings were conducted in classrooms. Psychologists also assisted teachers in understanding and responding to the children's emotional needs. Even after the initial 3 days, psychologists continued to meet with students. Classes eventually resumed, with no changes to the curriculum. As a widespread sign of mourning, national flags across the city were lowered. On March 22nd, in accordance with her parents' wishes, the 12-year-old victim of this brutal massacre was laid to rest in a private funeral. An impromptu memorial quickly formed at the location where Louise's body was found, drawing together many city residents. Shockingly, it was revealed that the perpetrators displayed little genuine remorse for their actions. Although they had cried at the police station, they quickly composed themselves, showing no real regret for what they had done. They had committed a cold-blooded, premeditated massacre, and astonishingly, the very next day, they were posting videos on their TikTok accounts. These accounts were later deleted due to a barrage of complaints. They interacted with their peers with chilling composure, as if the murder was a perfectly normal event for them. It is known that they were temporarily removed from their families and transferred to the youth department. Here, psychologists and psychiatrists began working with the teenagers, not only to address their behavior, but also to determine if any underlying mental abnormalities had contributed to this tragic outcome and whether they required treatment. Under the existing laws of the country, they would indeed bear no direct criminal responsibility for their actions. The prosecutor's office ultimately halted the investigation and closed the case, having definitively established that the children themselves had killed their classmate. There was no longer any reason to suspect a third person was involved in the massacre. At a subsequent press conference, the senior prosecutor stated that the perpetrators had to be protected because they were still children, emphasizing that emotion played a key role in the case. The devastated parents of the murdered girl were, understandably, beside themselves with grief and outrage over this decision. They simply could not fathom that such a brutal murder of their daughter could effectively go unpunished, carried out by these juvenile monsters. Thanks to their profound outrage and activism, this shocking case of child cruelty quickly became the singular topic of conversation across the nation. This incident ignited a widespread discussion about the undeniable imperfections of the German legal system, a system that not only allows such heinous acts to occur, but also appears entirely powerless to deliver justice or punish the criminals involved. The widespread public discontent was so intense that, after a period, the families of the teenage killers were compelled to leave the city. The parents found themselves under constant assault from the local community, which was not only outraged by the situation, but also terrified to live alongside child killers and their families. Neighbors began openly threatening the parents of the troubled teenagers, so for safety reasons, the murderers' families evacuated their homes. However, their children remain in a state institution, and their parents are reportedly still in contact with them. In a twisted turn, the parents of the killers appear to be the only individuals truly and severely impacted by the atrocities committed by their own children. The girls have been living separately from their families for some time, and there's a strong possibility they will never be returned to their biological parents. It is speculated they might end up in a boarding school for minors or be placed with foster parents. For a long time, very little has been publicly known about their situation, largely due to Germany's exceedingly strict privacy laws, which protect even the most violent criminals and their loved ones, especially when children are involved. This strict confidentiality also applies to complex cases like murders committed by junior high students, which is why their real names and photographs have not been disclosed. Psychologists and psychiatrists have continued to work extensively with the perpetrators. Remarkably, the teenagers were found to have no discernible mental disabilities. This finding only amplified the shock and horror surrounding the brutality of the attack. It was an insidious crime. These children meticulously planned and executed the killing in cold blood and with clear intent. Armed with a knife, they lured Louise into a trap and then brutally massacred her. All of this, as the schoolgirls themselves confirmed to the police, was done solely for revenge. Many experts began searching for accountability in this tragedy, leading to a barrage of negativity and hatred directed at the girls' parents. Thanks to current German law, these families could potentially simply change their names and relocate to a place where no one knows about their connection to the brutally cruel girls or even suspects they could be dangerous. This incident has ignited a nationwide wave of protests and profound discussion across Germany. According to numerous experts, the number of crimes in Germany, particularly serious ones involving minors, is alarmingly increasing each year. Several other disturbing cases have recently come to light, such as the situation involving two 14-year-old boys from Wunstorf who were classmates. In that instance, one of the juveniles had endured years of bullying, ultimately leading to him beating the other boy to death with a blunt object. In the summer of 2022, another shocking case surfaced. 13 and 14-year-old female classmates strangled their friend. In fact, serious crimes are being committed by children at even younger ages, with dozens of such cases involving minors occurring in Germany alone each year. All of this is a source of immense concern across the country, particularly because these cases often prove to be the most shocking and profoundly traumatic for the families and friends of both the victims and the perpetrators, who embark on a path of crime long before even graduating high school. The storm of indignation unleashed by these events has not subsided to this day. An initiative group quickly launched a petition demanding legislative changes to lower the age of criminal responsibility. Over 40,000 people signed it within the first few days alone. Some experts attribute the rise in violence to content on television and computers, suggesting it acts as a trigger. Statistical analysts have examined a vast number of games and TV programs featuring violent scenes, concluding that such content can initially impose violent models, encouraging young people to resolve conflicts through force. Given their still developing and fragile psyches, this significantly exacerbates the situation. Some experts believe that the state should assume complete control over these issues, overseeing the entire process of a child's upbringing. There's even a more radical viewpoint suggesting that municipal systems should primarily handle child rearing, as parents cannot always guarantee a child's complete and healthy development. In the eyes of many local residents, the parents of the killers bear a share of the guilt for this massacre, believing they failed in their upbringing. Perhaps they exhibited complete indifference to their children's lives or subjected them to cruel treatment. All of this, locals speculate, may have contributed to the children deciding that executing their former friend was a viable solution to their problems. It is, however, impossible to definitively ascertain the precise environment in which these schoolgirls grew up.